Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 194. As we always begin, Longmeadow, the time that we're in, coming from Teves, was yesterday Shabbos, Pasha Vayigash, Teves, 31 years from the Dedan, Noach, and Tovshin Mem Zayin, and going into the week of Pasha Vayechi, as it was then, related to Teves, was connected to Vayechi, and the Rebbe spoke in the 7 different talks that he gave following Teves, literally each night, another sikha, connecting it to the Parsha. And of course, this week as well is going into Asara B'Teves on Thursday, the fast of Asara B'Teves. Mashiach comes before that. It will be Yahofchi Yom HaMelu. It will still be a Yontiv, but it won't be through negative. It will be Yahofchi Yom HaMelu, L'Sosn L'Simcha L'Meidim Tevim. So we'll begin with talking about that, as well as this evening, and this is the reason that this program is starting at 2 o'clock instead of the usual 8 o'clock time, is because of Nittel. So I'll actually begin with that because that's the closest in this period of time. Nittel is one of these phenomenons that are part of Jewish history and part of Jewish culture and Jewish tradition. But what we have is the words of the Rebbe Rashab, the famous words of the Rebbe Rashab in Hayem Yem, that we don't learn Torah during the hours from sunset till midnight, not to add chayis, energy, vitality to the negative side. And that's how we follow it. And he said, not only that, the Rebbe Rashab said, he's halt, to not tolerate people who insist on learning and not following this. Which, of course, begs the question, we accept everything that we're told, whether we understand it or not, but what is the real explanation? Especially, in general, the Torah approach, and especially in Chassidus, is always chiyuv. That the way we transform darkness is through light. You add light. Poli yamamanan, we are day workers, and we do everything possible to add light. And here, we refrain from learning Torah, which in a way gives, because we're afraid that it would give chayis. Let's not use the word afraid, that's not the word he uses, but not to give any chayis. Seemingly one could argue that dafka through Torah, when you learn Torah, is heim kolim aleim, because hashkim b'hariv, we learn Torah, Torah brings aid into the world, and Torah is not makabel tumah. Torah does not accept, does not absorb, does not in any way, it repels any form of negative energy. So Torah would be the best way to cut off the chayis of any negative force. And here we refrain from learning Torah. And especially if you go with the Chassidus approach, and Chassidus Chabad, everything is chiyuv, you don't find examples like that we don't do something in order not to give chayis. We always add in kedusha. And that alone, that we give it such an asinus makom, we give it so-called some type of presence and some type of strength, isn't that, in a way, recognizing it and giving it strength? So I've never found a really adequate answer that I found adequate. As I said, we accept it, and as I state, as a tutman. I mean, of course, we have the example Tisha B'Av. You don't learn Torah. You could say the same thing. Why Tisha B'Av dafka we should learn Torah? You can only learn Torah in Yoni Avelis, Pesachta Mayit Cotton, and things connected to grieving and to mourning. But you could also argue the same thing, that the best way to fight the Churban Beis HaMikdash, the destruction, is by learning Torah. So we see that there are times, and there's a precedent, that the learning Torah is not just that you are learning Torah, that in a way you have to be careful not to feed negative forces because they do have power. If they didn't have power, then the best way is to ignore it. As we say, Hesach Hadas, avoid the negative and just do positive, and that itself, Ma'at Eir, a little light will dispel darkness. But you see from Tisha B'Av, there is something that we reckon with, because it's like recognizing there is a golas, there is a thing called Yenikas HaChitzenim in Chassidus. What's Yenikas HaChitzenim? Yenikas HaChitzenim literally means that the Chitzenim, the negative or the external forces, they wean or they nurse energy from our power. I mean, to use a simple example, where do maggots and where do bacteria gather? They don't gather where it's arid and dry. They go where there's nourishment. That's why, God forbid, when there's surgery, or God forbid, some other way, the opening up the internal organs of a person, you need extra sterilization because to protect from infection. Where do bacteria gather? Where negative forces gather? Where there's gedusha. Only with this tara is there possibility for tumah. The different dinim about this regarding different types of people if they pass away, and so on. Dam hu nefesh. Dafkin the dam is on nefesh. Because dam has a lot of kedusha, a lot of power. Kedesh kedoshim, one little blemish is in effect, has a toxic power. Like it says in the Gemara, even a speck of dust on the garment of a Talmid Chacham, the Vav, al-Bagid Talmid Chacham, is a very severe punishment for that. Whereas the same piece of dust on the garment of someone else is insignificant. Because a piece of dust on your eyeball is not a piece of dust on your finger. So wherever there's a lot of power and a lot of kedusha, it's extra vulnerable and extra sensitive in a time of golus, in a time when we don't have the Beis Hamidrash Hashlishi and Gula Amitis Vashlema, where there's Ruach Hatuma Avim in Oros, and all toxic forces will be eliminated. There's the ability for that kayach. Clearly, this what Nittel is connected with had power, and you see it spread all over the world, billions of people. The Rambam Taka says there's a positive thing in that as well, because liyasher saderech, it paves the way for Mashiach, for Achdus, that brought the message of Torah in their way to so many people, message of unity, though it's not perfect and all the different chesronos and faults, but bottom line is there, but it also had a power of a negative power. So you could argue that may be the reason that we recognize it, and that itself is not giving it more strength. That itself is saying, yes, there is strength when Golus Remi, when Malchus Edem, which is Esav, Kishazek comes Zen Nefel, like we know, Mulum Mulem Yemotz, two nations inside of Rivka, Yaakov and Esav, and Kishazek comes Zen Nefel. Is that in the Sinus Malcolm? That's the Ebrish that gave Keach, that Esav would have a grandchild, Magdiel Zuremi, the birth of Rome. So the Rome, Christian Western world, has power. And in Golus Edem, that's the Golus Edem. And we know the Sari HaMedinas, the leaders of the nations, have power from a higher place that give them strength. So thank God that today we have Malchus Shel Chesed in America and many countries, and most countries, that were once Seder Yisrael, and that were a cause of the oppressors of Israel. But today, that's a bracha. But there is strength to these Sarim, the Ayin Sarim, the 70 nations, and in our case, the Golus Edem, which is connected to Nittel, is the Golus Edem, and the worshipping of their belief system has power. So in a way, we recognize one night a year, when they honor that by not giving any chayes to that concept, because we want Taka to come, the Zekom Zanevul should be the Netzachon of Yaakov over Esav, like we say in the end of Parshas, in the end of Avadia, that's cited in the Parsha Vayishlach, that after Yaakov and Esav reconcile, that Esav invites Yaakov to come live side by side, and Yaakov says, "V'isnal li'iti, I will go slowly because we're not ready yet." But as the Rebbe explains in Vayeshev Tovshin and Beis, now we are ready after all the birudim. So obviously, once we're ready. But because there is a strength in that department, so to speak, and there's a possibility of Yinikas HaChetzenim, that's why this is indeed an exception. But it's an exception recognizing the Shchinta Begalusa and Golus Edem, Golui Moim. But there is a Golus, and until we don't have the full Geula, we recognize there is the possibility of a Yinikas HaChetzenim in the negative part. Obviously, there's the positive part, which is Sheva Mitzvos Bnei, to use our capacity and our potential, as we've been discussing in the last few weeks, and we'll talk about a little later more, about the potential of using opportunity, Oz Epech El Am Sofa Bruda, to actually teach the Christian world, the Muslim world, every part of the world, that their universal divine laws, and knowing that it's coming from Matan Torah, as the Rambam Paskins, the end of the 8th chapter in Hilchos Malachim. So it's not a contradiction, the two things. But as a recognition, there's that Nittel. The Rebbe speaks about this in different letters, not so much this particular explanation, but I refer you to the Sicha Vayeshev Tovshin Nun. Vayeshev Tovshin Nun is a very rare and unique Sikh. He talks about Nittel, among other things. It's in Sefer HaSichas Tovshin Nun. Let's look inside. The page which starts talking about this, is page 192. And essentially he says that the custom was Leila Esav Chayis, and the Frierdiker Rebbe says, they said that his father, the Rebbe Shmasad, Rebbe Rashab, would play shach, which is chess then, and or stand by the side and suggest different ways, different moves. And the Rebbe goes on to explain what that is, because the Rebbe says he turned a hira that even though it's surmara heder, and Nittel has one of the meanings of it is heder, means refrain, empty, so to speak, like a vacuum, and turn that around for a teyelas, that it should become something that he turn into shpil and shach, that Rebbe brings there, that shach is an element of using chachma and wisdom, but not with using teira and the kedusha of teira. It's interesting sikha to read, a lot of details about it, and obviously we still have a few hours till Nittel here in this part of the world, so it's kedai to read this because the Rebbe Taka says that comes Nittel, that's what we should do. We should be mizbein now. The Rebbe Nishma Seidin is standing and giving eitzes in Shach, and also Hira and Avedis Hashem around it. And of course we have the Sikha from Tovshin Ches printed in Yemei Bereshis, where the Rebbe edited the Sikha, the lessons you can learn from playing chess. As well as, of course, that picture of the Rebbe and the Rebbe Friedrich Rebbe playing chess, but that was not Nittel night. We know that now. That was due to the fact that the doctors had told the Friedrich Rebbe that he shouldn't exert himself. So chess was considered non-exertion compared to learning of Chassidus. The Rebbe also brings about the Talmud that used the night of Nittel to sew buttons for on his torn garments. And the Rebbe literally says that the way we take out the lesson is that we use Nittel, not obviously to learn, but we use it to contemplate on the picture of the Rebbe Rashab and the image of him playing or directing how to play and the lessons that learned from that, as discussed in the Sikha, page 192, again in the Sikha Vayeshev Tov Shin Nun. There already cites different letters from the Rebbe and different sources, so it really collects all together the subject matter. So it is definitely a more mysterious type of topic, but I believe it touches into the etzem inyan of the takeoff of Golus that did have the power. Edom, at the end of the day, Rome did destroy Beis Sheni, and the Eibishter definitely allowed it. It couldn't happen without that koyach. So you have to say that there's a power to Sari HaMedina, as it says in a number of places, and then when they embraced the religion that is honored tonight, we recognize that, and we recognize it with a certain, humility and trepidation. Not only do the reason that it says in other svarim about sakana, because it was sakana to go learn, because that night there may have been pogroms and other things that they take retribution against the Jews. However, the Leilais of Chayis is relevant even today, but that too can be used in a positive way when you understand the purpose of that, and obviously, as he explains in that Sikha, to turn it into something positive and use it in positive fashion. In recognition of that, we are doing this program here earlier, but preparing in a way how to use this nittel. So even something that seems so negative, you could say Leilais of Chayis, or go to sleep. Some people did. I remember having a chavrusa that used to go to sleep till midnight and go learn afterwards to fill what he was missing. But here the Rebbe says, no, there's ways to do it through bringing positive, but in a way that's allowed. Just like the Rebbe did with Tisha B'Av and the 9 days, that even though you're not supposed to learn Torah directly in Tisha B'Av, the Rebbe said, but let's learn and make siyumim where you're allowed to, wherever you're allowed to absolutely add in joy and add in ways through Torah. Obviously, so the same thing here, the Rebbe is showing us a way how to use nittel in the positive by contemplating, as I said, the Rebbe Rashab, and you can look up the Sikha, the more of the details that he speaks about there. He does say, and I should probably add this since it's relevant to our time, he says that Shpil and Shach, he says, a mischag was hot chochma, but in Yoni Rishus, and that sharpens the mind. They should later be able to understand Torah better. It's Mekadesh Shem Shemayim. For those that recognize that chess is a quality, by seeing that Eden Am Chacham V'Nochem know how to play it. And number 3, Afil Al Dovish Al Shus has a tayelis. For those that have actually don't do business around that. Not different than any other business that a person does that has Chachma. So he says the Hira is not to be bottle Chaz V'Shalom, in order to let the tayelis, to sugem in yone chochma, to add in chochma with the milas that we just mentioned, and mesav zayin zdokem v'chesed and hogas habayis, and so on. It says the Rebbe says clearly, "Zolman esnus in the zeit of zich mitzayir zayin dmus pnei kotshe from the Rebbe Shmuseiden." She used the time to imagine the Rebbe Rashab's face through the picture that we have of him, and mentions below about this picture. I'll soon talk about the picture, so I want to address that right now. Or those that actually saw him, similar to the idea of seeing the face of your master. the Miyasad of Temchet Mim, and how he behaved in order for us to be able to follow his ways. So there you have a Yirah for Nittel, which was very unique in that year, Vayishev Tov Shinun. Let's talk about Asara Teves and Vayechi. Asara Teves, of course, is also one of the days. That was not the Romans, but it was the Bavel, Asara Teves, that they also Motzah, they made a encampment, and they besieged the wall around Jerusalem. They surrounded it. It would be 6 months later that they would actually breach on the 17th of Tammuz, and then 3 weeks after that, destruction of the temple, Rachmana litzlan. So Asara Teves is like the beginning of the tzaras that would lead to if it becomes a fast day. Of course, Yehovchi Yom Mela, the Pnimius, as the Rebbe explains, of all these fast days, is Eis Rotzen, Yem Rotzen Lashem, a positive thing that we have to turn into something positive. And indeed, in the year 40 years ago, Tov Shel Lamed Ches, after the Rebbe had the heart attack, and this I spoke about a number of times, the Rebbe demonstrated and even used the example of the needle, that the vacuum brings even more power. Just like Nittel is a vacuum, it should bring more power to us in Kedusha, in the way that we are supposed to do it. So the same thing with Asara Teves, the Rebbe, what did he do? That year was also Mechadish, something he never did before, which was to speak Divrei Kfushin, which is words of Teira and words of Yisraelis and words of that the Rabbonim used to speak on fast days. The Rebbe started that Asara Teves. That was the first fast day after Shmini Atzeres of the heart attack, Lamed Ches. He spoke the night of Asara Teves, the day, said a Maimer. So that became, it was all Mugeh. So Asara Teves, Divrei Kfushin. One of the things, powerful things that Rebbe speaks there is that Asara Teves, the Avud Raham writes, is very unique. It says, Be'etzem hayem hazeh on Asara Teves in Nach. The only other place you find Be'etzem hayem hazeh regarding fast days is Yom Kippur. So he says, we learn Agzeder Sheva, that just like Yom Kippur, Be'etzem hayem hazeh is Deiche Shabbos. Yom Kippur comes out on Shabbos like it was this year. Yom Kippur, you fast. No other time do you do that. Tisha B'Av comes out on Shabbos, you don't fast. Push it off. Nitche. So the same thing, Avud Ram says, Asara Teves, if it would come out on Shabbos, would also be Deiche Shabbos, be more powerful than Shabbos. The only thing is, the way it was make the calculations, that it can't come out on Shabbos based on the way the Cheshbonus, the way we do it today, that we have a designated calendar that was established already by Hillel Azokin and so on. So the Rebbe asked a very obvious question. Asara Teves, so to speak, is much less than Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is mamish the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, and we fast the full night and day fast, and still it doesn't push off Shabbos. So how's Asara Teves, which is not only the encampment, the beginning of just surrounding the wall, it wasn't even the breach of the wall. Shivasar B'Tammuz, we also don't. 17th of Tammuz, we also don't push off. We also push Shabbos is more powerful than the fast. The Rebbe answers, because it's the beginning of the so-called the end. That if you really look at a problem, you always want to look at the root of a problem. Where did it begin? Had Bavel not been allowed to besiege Yerushalayim, they couldn't have then breached the walls and definitely not destroyed the temple. So Asara Teves is the beginning. So even though, practically speaking, the Churban was actually later, but the beginning, had it been nipped in the bud, whether in the Tshuva, Avis Yisrael, whatever it would have been, it would have prevented the whole issue. So Asara Teves in a certain way has a takeif because it was the beginning. Like the Frierdiker Rebbe says, the Rebbe doesn't bring that, but an example, no one gets lost in the woods suddenly. You veer off a bit, and you go further and further, and you don't catch yourself, you don't nip it in the bud, and suddenly you're lost completely. Same thing is with, God forbid, disease and infection and anything. Many things could be prevented if you stopped it early on. But once it becomes a monster of its own, it becomes very difficult to stem the tide. So the same thing is in Ruchnis and psychological, as the Rebbe says there, you have to protect not just the Beis Hamikdash, the wall around the Beis Hamikdash, the minhagim, asiyus siyag l'teira. There are things that the Torah says you should do, things you shouldn't do. But there's a siyag l'teira, you make a wall to protect. And not just that, you make sure there's not even a besieging of the wall, let alone the breach of the wall. That is Asara Teves. So that's in the negative, that it has that ability, because it's the beginning that brought on all the other things. The positive is which means if Asara Teves has something that in a way is more powerful than negative, then it also has a more powerful the positive. That when it's transformed in the Geula, it will have that power that's even stronger than Shabbos. So the stronger than Shabbos in the negative. Yom Kippur is a positive, because Yom Kippur is a positive day. But in the negative, but it's also more powerful than Shabbos because it has that, the etzem, the atzmi, which is a tremendous lesson, especially in context of Chassidus applied. The idea that when you look at any problem that we have, not wait to deal with the issues, but to nip it in the root. Preventive medicine, where you preempt issues by getting it in the root of the problem, not just the symptoms. Very often we deal with the symptoms, we don't get to the root. Asara b'Teves is a root. It's a lesson in the root of an issue. Parsha Vayechi, and as of course I'm speaking briefly, Parsha Vayechi has many lessons connected to this period in time. The most obvious lesson is, especially after Gimel Tammuz, similar message as Chayesora. Both Vayechi Yaakov and Chayesora, the name seems to be not consistent with what it says afterwards. Vayechi Yaakov, Beretz Mitzrayim, Shvas Shana, 17 years, 17 best years, Tev Gematria 17, good. But then it talks about his passing. The life of Yaakov was covered in Parsha Vayetze, and Parsha Vayishlach, and Parsha Vayeshev, Miketz, Vayigash. Okay, Vayigash, you could say Kate's a little less because Yosef is the main character, but this Parsha talk about the life of Yaakov. To call the Parsha Vayechi Yaakov, the same with Chayesora, where it also talks about our passing, because Tzadikim Gam B'Misasa Kruyim Chayim, the eternity of a tzaddik is recognized in the impact that he has when his Gashmi's Dikaguf is no longer here. Yaakov Avinu Loi Mes. Why? Because Mazare B'Chaim Avru B'Chaim. That's when you see really Vayachi Yaakov, the Yaakov is really living and lives on forever, because that never can be extinguished, God forbid. So Vayechi Yaakov is the ultimate lesson that with all that Yaakov went through, where did he live his 17 best years? As the Alter Rebbe explained to the Tzemach Tzedek, Dafke Mitzrayim. Again, the negative brought out the best. But the goal, of course, is Vayechi, that Yaakov lives on through us. Of course, the lesson is obvious regarding Gimel Tammuz, regarding all in Yoni Gedusha, that we lives on, and it lives on through Zari B'Chaim. When Zari do what they have to do, then Ahu B'Chaim is an automatic thing, something that Rebbe spoke a lot about those years in Tovshim Mem Hey, Mem Vov, Mem Zayin, the years, the preceding Hey Tevis, and then the subsequent to Hey Tevis. So it's taking a negative, just like we spoke about Nittel, and just like we spoke about Asara b'Tevis, and turning it into a positive. But the positive is in our hands. Ich getan als, the Rebbe said. Tut als was ihr kennt. We have to do something. And that makes Yaakov come alive. Zari b'chaim, afu b'chaim. So now, with that, let us go into some questions. And of course, the biggest question that's coming in, and it keeps pouring in, I can't tell you how many questions have come in regarding phenomenon of last week. Our good friend Shalom Mordechai Rubashkin, released from prison, Zeis Chaneke, B'shatishka Achama, Simche, Kiva Simche Seitzehu. He came out with joy and exuberance that suddenly, spontaneously consumed you could say, the entire frum world. Without planning, without anything. Literally, as soon as the news spread, whether it was in Muncie where he lives, whether it's in Borough Park where his parents live, whether in Crown Heights in 770, there was suddenly this outburst that literally transformed and transcended the differences between different kehillas, Litvish, Chassidim, Polish, Charedim, of all different walks of life. All were united in this joy. And it's still going on. But people are asking the question, what is this exactly? What happened here? Now remember, this was not a planned thing. The news came, it was spontaneous, it wasn't like some planned action. It has happened. It's something that touched a chord in so many thousands of people. Something like that cannot be ignored, especially when it affects so many people, and in a positive way. You know, often you see achdus around something negative, God forbid. Achdus about something positive. And a simcha. And of course, the next question is, what is this, besides what is the significance? Can this turn into something, a positive force that can be used in the future? So I thought it appropriate to speak about in the context of Chassidus applied. And first, let me read some questions. Some are negative questions, obviously, and as I always do here, I do not mince words here, so I'm going to read them. I hope nobody's offended, but it's important to read, because before you respond, you need to know what different people are thinking. So here one person writes to us, Dear MLC, while I have great respect for your columns, I must wonder how you can find Rubashkin's release as a sign of trust and faith and a cause for celebration. That was something I wrote about right after he was released. His focus on bitachon and talking about the belief in God and so on. So this person is taking issue with it. He's a convicted criminal who was released early because some thought the sentence was disproportionately severe. This in no way exonerates his mistreatment of workers or other violations of civil and religious law that he committed. His behavior caused great damage to those who kept kosher and confirmed the cynicism of others about the gap between what is professed and what is practiced. Chanukah is about religious freedom and not the early release of criminals. I can assure you that there are many circles in the Jewish world that only find embarrassment in Rubashkin's conduct and no cause for celebration. Again, I apologize for reading something that may be offensive to some, but I think it's important to hear what some people say. And I qualify by saying clearly this may very well be a person with an agenda and so on, not familiar with all the details. But I will address it, obviously, that's my whole point. Another person writes, Baruch Hashem that Shalom Mordechai Rubashkin was released. May I offer just a couple of messages about this event or subject. First message, let's use this time of Eis Ratzon, auspicious time, to make good resolutions to do acts of goodness and kindness. But so many articles about what happened to Shalom, but why are there so many articles about what happened to Shalom Mordechai Rubashkin? Am I the only one that thinks it's a bit excessive? Also, what happens when all the hype dies down? Will our life be changed? Why, when a tragedy strikes, do we all of a sudden say, how can we change even a little? Let's start with the basics of adding in acts of goodness and kindness, a little bit every day. It can be like Yosef when he asked the chief butler and chief baker why they were so upset, or saying hi to a fellow Jew or non-Jew in the street or in a supermarket. Small things add up big time. I hope news like this happens all the time, but we should still focus on even smaller good news and magnify that, so to speak, that we get as excited. Magnify that, so to speak, that we get as excited from the much bigger news. This is a lesson that I learned from all of this. What's yours? And second message, please see. Okay, I'm not sure what he's referring to. So let's seize these moments of emes simcha when we're all identifying as one mishpacha of Anash, to make achlotas, to ensure that we will be proud to face the Rebbe with our families and say, Ru gedulim shegedalnu, by each of us implementing the expectations and standards that we all know that the Rebbe wants from each of us. More kfi sitim l'teira, ourselves and with others, raising the standard of our davening and conduct in shul, walking in the streets in a way that people will say, there goes a chassid of the Rebbe. It would be a great pity to allow today's amazing Exuberance to fizzle out without capitalizing on it in the way that Shalom Mordechai has set an example for us all. What are your thoughts? And finally, a third comment that I'll read now. There's many more, but I just can't read them all. We won't have any time left. Could you please comment? No doubt I'm not the only one to approach you with a query on this topic. While all are justifiably relieved that Shalom Mordechai Rubashkin's sentence has been reduced when one reads a little about the facts of the case, serious misdemeanors were tried and accordingly sentenced. Apparently 30 years is the standard for workplace fraud of this kind. Well, I don't know if that's correct, so I'm just qualifying saying that. Either we say the court erred and Shalom Mordechai is innocent of the crimes, or we support the justice system and its decision. It is understood that the general view is that the sentence was nevertheless excessive. However, Shalom Mordechai was not found to be innocent. Whether he's a great Baal Tzedakah or an outwardly frum Jew, all not for us to judge. Was the public celebration warranted? Okay. This is a selection of sentiments. I've also received comments, and I'll just sum up what they talk very much on the positive, that this is literally a miraculous event. Rarely have we seen such unprecedented achdus, unity, and joy. And how can we explain this in a bigger context of things? So let's talk about it for a moment, for a few moments, as best to my ability, and using precedents, obviously. I'm not going to comment just my own personal opinion, which is really irrelevant, but rather what's the Torah, the Chassidic way to look at this. So I found there's a sikha from the Rebbe in Tofshin Nun Beis. I'll give you the source immediately. Let me look it up here. It goes like this. Tovshinun Beis, Volume 2. It's a sikha from Parsha Tetzaveh, Nun Beis. There's an order there where the Rebbe refers to Lahoyer, the Bashgacha Pratis, it's page 401 in Volume 2 of Tovshinun Beis, edited sikha. The Rebbe speaks about Bashgacha Pratis, someone who's released from prison this Friday, he says, and he was, actually, no, is that not really? That he was Zeiche, he was successful in the court of law. And even though it happened with a person, an individual, it's shaykh to everybody, so we all participate in his simcha. So you can look it up there. Can we apply this here? You can make the argument that, first of all, it's regardless of the issues of why Mordechai was in prison in the first place, and I'm not here, I'm not a judge, I'm not a lawyer, I don't know all the details. Let's even make the argument that much of it was based on anti-Semitism and based on exaggeration and so on. So number one, we live in a country where we know, and many people, businessmen told me, that this is things he did, not that it justifies it, but people do it, and if they really want, the court system can go after everyone. Again, this doesn't justify it, but you need to know that. It's number one. Number two, even if he did those things, there's still the issue of Ashgacha Pratis, of a person coming out of prison, Ayid, on Zeis Chanukah, and it's also part of the system. He didn't come out, he didn't break out of prison. Just like there's a justice system that put him there, that same justice system has a president and has senators, and they have the power to commute a sentence. So just like if you're so honoring the justice system, honor also the commutement. That's also part of it. Regardless, that means the president put himself on the line. He's no relative of the Rubashkins. He put himself on the line. He definitely, I'm sure, the Justice Department and others are not happy with his decision. He's now under pressure, I'm sure, to commute others, because he has not done that to anyone else. Put himself on the line, as well as the others that signed the documents, that signed letters of support. So you have hundreds of people who felt that this was an unjust sentence. So it didn't just happen that it was like some type of some breakout of prison or something like that. It was the system itself came to realize that's why we have checks and balances. Judges are appointed. Judges can make mistakes. Judges can go overboard. Whatever the reasons are, I'm not going to now judge the judge. But bottom line, that's part of the system too. So there's a celebration. If the system says that, you know what, his sentence is unjust, too long. He sat long enough for the crime. It's a first-time crime. First time that it ever happened, that he ever did it, and so on. So that too has to be recognized. So all these people who are so critical and say justice system, justice has to be upheld, justice was upheld. This was not an illegal getting out of prison. It wasn't some type of trick. It was the President of the United States who has the power to pardon or to commute a sentence, and that's what he did. So that's just basically just addressing that. So it offends me in a way when I hear people start saying the justice system and this is like what he saw. So no, who's celebrating the crime? No one's celebrating the crime. That brings me to point number two. You're celebrating the release. No one says, oh, this is great crime and let's all embrace it. God forbid. There's a Teira, Dinah Malchusa Dinah, we follow laws. But a Jew released by the system is in a way like a mini miracle, if not a great miracle. No one thought it would ever happen. Spontaneously happening, literally, K'chus Hashem Kerefayin, and it touched the court. So no matter what you think about Shalom Mordechai, and we'll get to him in a moment, the bottom line is thousands of people, you're going to suddenly say, all these thousands of people, something's wrong with them. No. They didn't get to celebrate a crime. They didn't get to celebrate criminal. They came to celebrate a justice being served by the justice system itself, yes, through the president and his supporters that all supported this, and to a person who suffered great enough. 8 years is a long time. So the spontaneous outbreak, that for sure is Gedusha. That you can't argue. Are we turning this into Chaga Geula? Is it Yutas Kislev? No, this sounds nothing connected to one another. A Jew comes out of prison, and for an unjust or a disproportionate sentence, the Eden felt a certain achdus with the person. They felt the simcha. They felt that, and I would like to add that I think that Eden Bechlal, after all these years in Golus, and Befrach Siddi Chabad after Gimel Tammuz, there's a certain element, I don't want to use the word quiet desperation, but there's a certain element we really want a miracle. And here, we have comfortable lives, Baruch Hashem. And many of us are prosperous. And we definitely don't have, Rahman al-Islam, the exuberance that our parents and grandparents had. But there's still the wearing down of Golas. People know it's not it. And we're waiting for the Gula. So suddenly a piece of news happens that you could see, a thing that nobody expected. People thought he's going to stay there, God forbid, for many years. And unexpected. On the day of Chanukah, as Chanukah was coming to a conclusion, so spontaneous, I think touched a chord of bitachon in people, like sparked the hope that we all really are waiting for, that things like this could happen. People have told me, this could happen. There's situations I thought were hopeless. Maybe that could also happen. How could you laugh at that or be cynical or dismiss that? That it gave people hope? Regardless of why it came. There are many times things that it could be even starting with a negative. Obviously, had there never been a court case and Shalom Mordechai would never have sat, but everyone would have been happy. And it didn't start with a positive. But many times a negative thing can end up in a positive. And that's how you didn't have to think. Sometimes people do make mistakes. And this, the sad thing is they stay with the mistakes and nothing comes good out of it. Here, let's say there's mistakes were made. And I'll say for sure there were mistakes made. And even crimes. But it turns out to give people, not one person, but thousands of people hope and a sense of pride, of Jewish pride. That's what you have to focus on. And I say this to all those that wrote the words. I hear what you're saying. And I think you have to stop being so nitpicky, because remember, as you look at others, you have to be looked at as well. How about your own? You're perfect. We're not here worshiping, and we're not mythologizing, or we're not, what's the word I want to say? We're not celebrating criminal activity. We're celebrating hope, even in dark situations, even when it seems hopeless. A man with a family coming out on Chanukah, which of course Chanukah is a miracle. We have a miracle in our time, a miracle that gives people hope. That cannot be denied. So we're looking at the result of it. What comes of it, of course, is the big question right now. I don't know if Shalom Mordechai is going to hear what I'm saying here, but I'm definitely going to share it with him personally. But I believe because Bashgacha Protis, he's the shliach, and he says it himself, it's not about me. He became the shliach that galvanized and brought together so many people in achdus and joy and simcha, that perhaps he can turn this into apul, not perhaps, he must turn this into apul nimshaches, that maybe go to community to community, family to family, and perpetuate achdus. It's what we need. Achdus will lead us to Mashiach, the Rebbe told us. So if it turns into a movement and a campaign that continues on, then that's a true redemption. Then you could say that even the negative things that began, even the mistakes that were made, that's real tshuva. Because you turn it into a positive force. What we saw now has to be continued. Because like any honeymoon, any inspiration dissipates. But if it could be turned into a movement, going from community to community, bringing people together, mutual understanding, that we're much more similar than we are different, bringing people Chassidus, to learn Chassidus, learn Primis HaTeira, Simcha. That Agdus itself could bring the Gula, which many people said was like a little taste of what will happen. Everyone spontaneously dances in celebration. So though there are elements here that no one's condoning and no one's looking at, but that's not the point. That's not the point. Now, is this to be turned into personally, it's his Geula, and it's his Ness, and for his family, and we celebrate with him. No one's turning this into something more than that. I think it has to be all contextualized. It is what it is. What happened. And now the key thing is to use this energy that everybody witnessed. How can we harness it into the future? That's no question the issue right now at hand. So we're all besimcha for Shalom Mordechai Rubashkin and his family and his elderly parents. Thank God they're able to see him in their deep years. They should have arichas yom v'shanim teves. No one's making anyone to a martyr here. No one's making anyone to a tzaddik. We're talking about looking at reality. On the contrary, this is a person just like all of us, made his mistakes, and yet was able to unite in this fashion. Kol hakavod. I would say even the statements he made, constantly referring to Shem Shamayim Shagabifiv, that God is behind us and Hashem was there. And the stories he's telling about how he was strong and it brought out his own deeper bitachon. And that when he left prison, which he had to leave quickly, he went with a shara bitachon from Cheves Halavavos that gave him strength. These are lessons that everybody can learn from. What is bitachon? situation. What do you do when things are difficult, when things seem hopeless? You're behind, everyone has their own personal prison. You can go on and on, the lessons that can be learned from that, and that's what we have to focus on. And there's no question, no one is here looking to condone, and no one sees this as some type of license that you can go ahead and do some things that are inappropriate. There are laws of the land, there are laws in Torah, and that's what we have to follow. But that still doesn't take away from the, as I said, spontaneous, which that is undeniable. Thousands of people are celebrating. They're celebrating something of something that is powerful and strong. Okay. With that, let us move to another. President Donald Trump commuted Shalom Mordechai's sentence, and a few weeks before that, or a week before that, 2 weeks before, when was it? I don't remember. It was, it's almost 3 weeks. Also announced that America's recognition and moving of the embassy to Jerusalem as a capital. So initially I was not going to speak about it, but to be honest, because of the Shalom Mordechai story, said I'll speak about this as well. So the question is there any significance to Trump's announcement about Jerusalem? So this may be a little counterintuitive to what everybody's thinking. Obviously, anytime a president of the United States, and we, as you know, Leiv Melachim V'Sarim B'Yad Hashem, the heart of kings and leaders is in the hands of God. So a king and a leader of a country, when he does things, it's more than just an individual because he has some type of power from the Sar L'Mayla that's mislabish in the meshul of the Hamedina, as the Rebbe's words. So therefore there's always significance to anything he does. But I want to also make a point here. We, Eden, were never dependent, Eretz Yisrael was not dependent on any country's recognition of it. Not the country itself, and not its capital. So the same question you could ask, is there significance to the Balfour Declaration? Is there, which recognized the idea of a constant of a state for the Jewish people, a homeland for the Jewish people. Recognition to what happened in 1948 when the UN voted for the partition for the state of Israel. It's the same question. What is the significance of that? Is there significance? I'm sure there's some significance, but you have to, as a Torah person, take it into context. And I'm not saying it's not valuable. But remember, Eretz Yisrael is a holy land and a promised land and a chosen land long before the UN, before Balfour, and before Trump. So the recognition gives strength and support and also demonstrates to our enemies that we are a strong nation and we will stand strong and we're not going to buckle to pressure and to terrorism and to other types of boycotts and other types of muscling and bullying. Absolutely. But does it change anything fundamentally? Yerushalayim is a capital, regardless whether anyone recognizes it or not. So I have a certain mixed feelings in how to talk about it. So I definitely recognize the president says something, that may move the embassy. You should also remember, America already recognized Jerusalem as the capital because that's where Israel recognizes. Is the embassy issue, the movement. So there's no question that it adds a takeif. Just like if the Arab world would suddenly recognize Israel, yes, it's a good thing because it'll maybe lead to peace, more peace. But does it really change the dynamic? It doesn't change the dynamic. It means that the world is starting to recognize the truth. In that sense, absolutely, it's a certain recognition of truth. As President Trump, as I've always said, I'm not a pro-Trump, I'm not anti-anti. I'm more anti-anti. Like anyone. The Eibishter chose him, there's no question. He didn't do anything right, really, to win this election. Meaning, it was against all odds. But God is the master planner. And through Trump, he may do great things, and he's already done some good things. And we have to be able to look at it in that way. So even for those that are so-called Trump haters, remember God runs the show, not Trump, and not Obama, and not Putin, and not anyone else. And we have to recognize that. And we hope that these leaders will do what's right, and all we have to look at them for righteousness, for justice, to follow the Sheva Mitzvos Bnei, what is just, which includes, of course, what is just in the Middle East, what is just in Eretz Yisrael, and so on. So I look forward to get all your critique and your comments on this and continue the discussion. With that, let me go to the next issue at hand, and that is, the question is, how much can bitachon change? Before I continue, I neglected to mention, I was talking about cross-referencing. We have an entire section on our website, meaningfullife.com/MyLife, that has all the archives, all the 193 episodes, all marked, and they're also timestamped that if you go to the YouTube link, you can actually find the topic you're looking for. There's the place you can submit your anonymous questions, and the essays as well from the previous year's essays contest. So on the topic of Teves and Vayechi, I wanted to cross-reference to episodes 49 and 95. And now we are moving on to the next question, how much can bitachon change? The question is like this. I understand that through bitachon one can change a situation which naturally would be impossible. You can say that Rubashkin is a good living example of that. Trag gut v'zayin gut, stood strong, and his bitachon was even though he didn't expect. That's what bitachon is. It breaks through walls and cells, even those that we don't expect. So here's the question that the person is asking. Let us say that because of their neshama, they are meant to have a certain difficulty in life, a person. For example, financial health, relationships, marriage, challenges in that area. If that neshama's whole purpose is to come down in this world, to overcome specifically that difficulty can bitachon change it. How would it be able to change it for open good if the person neshama is apparently supposed to live life with that challenge? That was the whole reason why the person neshama was sent here in this world. Very good question. First, let me make some cross-reference to more. I've spoken about bitachon a number of times. Episodes 111, 113, 125, 142, 166, 190. And essays have also been written about it, which were reviewed in episodes 97, 143, and 150. So you see, it's a pretty elaborate topic. To answer your particular question, well, first of all, Yehi Rotzen, we say, which means you could change the Rotzen. Even though neshama may come down for a purpose, you can always beseech God, and He could change the destiny. It may be difficult, but you could change. In other words, there's no one that's doomed to a life of suffering. They may come down, they may need to go through certain things, but the Eibishter is a harbe drachim l'malkim. He has many ways. He could always do it in another way. A lesser suffering, or a suffering that is of a different shape and nature. Or, as we know, that many times that even when the Talmidei, the Tanoim gave Rabbi Lozer, the son of Rashbi, who came to them for brachas, they gave him language that seemed like opposite of blessings. So one of the explanations is that really they were blessings. Now that is the Gemara says, Rashbi says, they were really blessings. One of the explanations to explain how they were really blessings, because it's all how you interpret it. So there's no question that there are many ways that the Eibishter has. So there's no such thing as just locked a certain way. That's why we mispal and we ask. And in Chanam, bitachon could change the course of one's destiny and history. That's the bottom line answer. Will it? That's up to Hashem, and that's up to the level of bitachon. So the answer is absolutely yes. Here in this case, you see, bitachon is exactly the operative word that Shalom Mordechai keeps using again and again, shara bitachon, and the different things that he took from Chassidus, the strength to be able to get through a difficult situation. And yes, it did break through. At the end of the bottom line, it did break through. We have to believe that bitachon was the real power. It wasn't Mr. Trump, and it wasn't other intervention. They helped. They were the Kelim. They were the Zeichen to be the Shluchim. Tevusa l'shakya. You say thank you to the waiter, but chomra l'mara. The wine belongs to the master, and the master is God. Okay. Next question is about the pictures. Why don't we have pictures of all the Rebbeim? So I'm following up on this because this is connected to the discussion of Nittel, because the Rebbe spoke about Vayeshev Tavshin Nun, and actually speaks there that just to go back to that Sikha, Tavshin Nun, he brings about the pictures of Rebbe Rashab, and actually says that Rebbe Rashab did not want picture taken of him. The Rebbe says, Yesh Shleimer, why did he allow? It was once for the passport that he allowed it. So the Rebbe says, why did he allow it? Let me just find where it says it. Al-Pi will explain, we understand why the Rebbe Rashab was makpid to extreme, not to allow any picture of him. And Leidach, when he was at the end of his days in Rostov, and he needed to travel from there, they needed to take a picture, he allowed it. But it's Seinei. Because to give this kayach in order for Nittel to be able to transform. And the Rebbe says, Chen Yeshleim, the same thing you could say, but he gave the picture of the Alter Rebbe. So even though that Yeshleim was because the government said so, and the same thing with the Tzemach Tzedek, even though there's people who say that it was done without his will, against Shenasa Lebedi Diose. It was done it was done without his knowledge, officially. Then the Rebbe continues, the Baal Shem Tov, the Magi, the Mittel Rebbe, and Rebbe Marash, we don't have a tziyur or a tmuna, an image, a portrait or a picture. And then Seichens to Yud Kislev Tovshin Mem Dalet. So Yud Kislev Tovshin Mem Dalet is a fascinating sikha where the Rebbe speaks that Yesh Emrim, that Rebbe Marash, there's also a picture. And the Nesiach Chabad, the only one that's not a Mittel Rebbe. And the Rebbe asked the question, don't you have to have a Hoya Nechareis Esmerecha, like we have in the sikha about the Rebbe Rashab, to see the face of our master, the teacher? So the Rebbe says, because you can't say it would deprive us of that, you have to say that you can reach the same level of envisioning his face through the learning and through Hasogeh. This is how the Rebbe explained why we don't have the Mittel Rebbe. He doesn't explain why we don't have the picture, but he explains we can't be lacking that element. So it has to be through the learning. We grasp him, just like he says, we can grasp the Mittel Rebbe and even his image, his face, through the learning of his Torah. Similarly, in the Sikha, I believe Shabbos Parsha Tetzaveh Tovshin Chav Zayin, the Rebbe also spoke about the image of the Mittel Rebbe, because he sent Chassidim to Chevron, to Eretz Yisrael, and because they felt they would lack the Mamorim that he said, the Rebbe Mittel Rebbe gave them Mamorim. That's why in Eretz Yisrael you find a lot of manuscripts that the Mittel Rebbe sent only to them in Eretz Yisrael. But the Rebbe said, but there was lacking seeing his face. So the Rebbe said, you have to say, like Sfichim, that it had that type of delay reaction, that it would ultimately also lead them to be able to be miskasher and connect also to his image. You can look there in that Sikha. So I don't have an answer for you why there's no pictures. Everything's Hashgacha Pratis, and there may be deeper reasons, but I'll just share with you some what we do know about the pictures and the different places. Okay. Now we have a few questions follow-up. So let me do some follow-up. And then we'll do the Chassidus question and we'll do the MyLife essays. Good. Follow up. First, the Sheva Mitzvos. Since we're talking about Sheva Mitzvos, we talked about Mr. Trump, we talked about the responsibilities we have, especially in our day and age, as the Rebbe made it clear, that we have the opportunities and the freedoms to be able to literally reach and influence and inspire non-Jews. So, you see the following, Sheva Mitzvos. The same fellow keeps writing titles to me that just make me smile. I'll just read it just to give a little simcha ta'idin. To the Supreme Jedi, Master Mashpia, Chief Warrior for the Forces of Good and Light in our galaxy, Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Greetings and blessings. You get the idea. Trust me, I don't take it so seriously. In episode 193, you read my comments in response to your question about what we can do to boost the 7 Noahide laws. Thank you. I just wanted to add a postscript to my point about making PragerU-style videos, sharing the Sheva Mitzvos, 7 Mitzvos. Non-Jews, to my knowledge, can only have a relationship with Hashem based within nature, reaching to the name Elokim. It is a uniquely Jewish quality of soul that allows us to tap into Yud-K, Vav-K energy. We also learn at the end of chapter 1 of Tiny that it is only a Jew that has the capability to be altruistic. Everyone else can only do things out of self-interest. I've discussed this topic many times. It's not that black and white as you're saying it. But let's see where you're going with this. As such, the way we can at least initially sell the 7 mitzvahs is by making them relatable. To sum up my idea, I'm suggesting videocasts with a rational approach to why the 7 mitzvahs benefit all and why it is thus in a person's self-interest to follow these universal principles. They make a person's macro world as well as the world at large a better place. For instance, the mitzvah to believe in one God. If we look at the founding of the USA based on "In God We Trust" and "E Pluribus Unum," and liberty, proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof, and so on, anyone can clearly see that while there is freedom of religion and worship in the USA, there was never supposed to be freedom from religion. Indeed, many of the founding fathers said the USA will only survive as a free country if its citizens remain religious. If we look at the blessings of wealth and equality in our country, based on individualism and capitalism, they are all rooted in a deep belief in the idea that every man was created in the image of God. We also see this with the prohibition of murder, thinking of this nowadays with an abortion industry that kills the most innocent. We can see a clear distinction between those who view human life as a cluster of cells versus those who see an individual forming in Hashem's image. So too, if we look at the mitzvah of sexual morality and look around us at the lives destroyed by leaders in politics, the media, and Hollywood, and conversely, how monogamous relationships is the context of a married couple, man and woman bring peace. In the context of a married couple, man and woman bring peace, stability, and harmony in the world, we can clearly see how this mitzvah has its practical benefits. In summary, and sorry for being so long-winded, I think a rational approach to these mitzvahs on a platform such as PragerU could reach millions and would be well received. May the force be with you. God bless. Let me just say a very important comment, though it's somewhat, because you allude to something which I think needs to be clarified. The Rambam paskins, based on the Gemara, Le'elam yasik adam b'teir mitzvah shalei l'shma shematech shalei l'shma bo l'shma. Le'elam, which means initially, not only as a plan B, b'diavad. A person should serve God, do mitzvahs for ulterior motives, because from Leil Shema, from ulterior motives, he'll come to pure motive. As the Rambam paskins at the end of Hilchos Sheva, chapter 10, that everyone does things for a motive. It could be for spiritual reward, it could be for physical reward, it could be for honor, it could be for other things they feel they will benefit from it. Only Avram Eyevi, Avram my beloved, did something which was what? Eses ha'emes mipnei shu emes. Committed to truth because it was true. So to just say that the only non-Jews are the way you explain it, no, the way you explain it to Jews is also, in a way, they should understand how it's good for them. And there are many sikhs that talk about this. I just wanted to make it clear that because people make a big misunderstanding in making the distinction between Jews and non-Jews regarding this. Regarding this, there's a lot of similarities, and I've spoken about it in the past in a very direct and specific way, and therefore that needs to be just clarified as a side. But in general, yes, our effort with Sheva Mitzvah Bnei is incumbent upon us. The Rebbe charged us with this, and absolutely we have to do everything possible, and I thank you for your ideas. There were another two follow-ups that I will do right now. Yes. One is allowing yourself to be abused. This was in episode 193. So was the Sheva Mitzvahs, by the way. It was last week's episode. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, thank you so much for your ongoing weekly Farbrengen casts. Well, that's a new name. I haven't heard that before, which help so many of us with applying Chassidus to our lives. I was very touched by the question regarding repenting after allowing oneself to be abused. I too was abused greatly by my ex during our divorce process, in which she hurled all sorts of horrific, absolutely false allegations at me, making time and time again, even after recanting in court in sworn testimony. I often wondered what about me and my personality allowed me to be thus abused. Two thoughts and metaphors come to mind. One, when one reads the story of Joseph in the Parsha, in the beginning of Parshas Vayeshev, and continuing through the end of the book of Bereshis, one can see a change in his personality and how he himself does repent, i.e. change his ways, after allowing himself to be abused by his brothers. First, by sharing his dreams with his brothers, he put himself in a situation in which he was ripe for being hated. Often as a kid, when learning the story, I would wonder to myself why he needed to share the dreams with them. Why couldn't he keep them to himself? As I grew older, it seemed to me to be immaturity, and ironically, a need to be liked and respected, that allowed him to put himself into that relationship struggle with them. Then when Yaakov sends Yosef to his brothers at 17 years old, knowing how much his brothers despised him, the reader is often thinking, no, don't go. Yet Joseph goes and gets thrown into a pit full of snakes and scorpions, and ultimately sold into slavery. In this case, he still isn't in tune to the inner voice that would have prevented him from going, and is violated by his brothers. Next, when Yosef works for Potiphar, he knows that Potiphar's wife wants to have her way with him, and he again puts himself into a situation where he can be victimized. A situation in which he is alone in the house with her. Yet at the last minute he saves himself by running away. He has begun to internalize the message of not allowing himself to be victimized, to be abused. By the time he is hand of the king, he has internalized the message. He marries Potiphar's daughter, thus assuming a strong position in the family, no longer the slave and victim. He has taken control of the family's destiny. So too, when his former abusers, his brothers, come to Egypt, he controls the situation and doesn't allow them to dominate. Although we know that they are a force to be reckoned with. He separates Shimon and Levi, the duo who destroyed the Shechemites, in order not to create a situation in which they can victimize him and Egypt. He has made the metamorphosis. That's point number one, this person writes. Number two, Lahavdil, President Donald Trump doesn't allow himself to be victimized by the fake news media. In the USA, we have seen Republican president and candidate alike get maimed and castrated by the media. Whether it was sweet but naive George W. Bush, milquetoast Mitt Romney, or looking to please everyone John McCain, each one, when in a position of leadership or trying to assume one, got attacked by the fake news media and accused of being a horrible person. President Trump, though, has fought back in a way that none of his predecessors have done. When punched, he has punched back twice as hard. He hasn't allowed them to control the narrative and hasn't allowed himself to be victimized. Thus far, we see that instead of being impeached himself, he remains standing atop the ash heaps of his arch enemies, the likes of Charlie Rose, Matt Lauer, and Hollywood. Most people nowadays realize how corrupt and vacuous these left-wing institutions are. In addition, he has created an atmosphere in which God, individualism, capitalism, and national security aren't dirty words. I haven't been entirely able to internalize the take-home message for myself vis-a-vis my situation. My ex still holds my daughter hostage from me, and I haven't yet been able to follow Yosef's transformation or the leadership skills of DJT, that's Donald J. Trump, but I know I have to do it in order to grow. To the woman who was victimized, I'm so sorry for you, and my heart hurts for you and the experience you've been through. Certainly, as Rabbi Jacobson said, you should remember that you were the victim and the perpetrator committed a crime against you. But I think you're right to think about what lessons you can learn from the experience and how to put yourself only in safe situations. God bless. I read this in its entirety because of the power of the message. I don't necessarily agree with all the idolizing of Donald Trump, even though there are some good points here. You know, Donald Trump and Yosef are not necessarily in the same breath, but I appreciate your points and comments, and thank you for that. Okay. We will talk about the Dreidel topic next week because of time limits. Let me go to the Chassidus question of the week, and that is about Oros, the Teyu, and Kelim, the Tikkun. The Rebbe said, Chof Ches Nissen, Tofshin Nun Aleph, which is 27 years ago, going to be 27 years, 26 and a half years, that you tut altus can do everything you can, and added Oros, the Teyu, energies of Teyu, in Kelim and containers of Tikkun. I made the point, and I gave a talk at the Kinus HaShluchim for Shluchim, that this is a rare expression, because usually in Chassidus, the Tikkun of Teyu is that in Teyu, the Oros are too intense, Merubim, the Kelim are too small, and therefore too weak, so there was Shviris HaKelim, the shattering of the containers. Tikkun is a Tikkun both in the Oros and the Kelim. Oros the Teyu, less and more disciplined Oros, and Kelim the Tikkun, Rechavim, wide and expansive containers that can contain. And here the Rebbe says, Oros the Teyu and Kelim the Tikkun, not Oros the Tikkun and Kelim the Tikkun. So I said, I don't recall the Rebbe mentioning it elsewhere or discussed elsewhere. So it was pointed out to me, someone said, I thank you very much for your great talk that you gave at the Kinus HaShluchim. And I pointed out to you that in Chelik Lamed Hey, Parshas Ve'era, there is also reference to that expression. And now I'm learning, Parshat Teira Eri says, it's a Hebrew letter, so I'm just translating, that the whole Maimon is about how Yaakov is misaken the Kelim of Tikkun, because he wanted to be mamshech the Oros of Teyu of Esav. Correct. So I still stand by what I'm saying, because you don't see exactly the Lashon Oros, the Teyu, and Kelim, the Tikkun, but you do have the idea to be Yerish, to inherit, or to be mamshech the Oros of Teyu in Kelim, the Tikkun. So the concept exists. Then someone pointed out to me that Nasicha, and let me pull up the Sicha right now, from the Frierdiker Rebbe. When is the Sicha? The Sicha is Achon Shal Pesach Tovshin Zayin in America, where the Rebbe speaks, the Frierdiker Rebbe, page 120, the Sefer HaSicha is Tovshin Vav to Tovshin Yud, printed later years, of the Sichos of Frierdiker Rebbe, and he says about, after that McCall Dvorkin sang the Nigun of Michal's Loshever, The Frierdiker Rebbe says, I thank McCall Dvorkin, because due to a song of his, I was zeichet to hear from my father, from the Rebbe Rashab, a beer for several hours on the inyan of Eres de Teyu and Kelim de Tikkun. And he tells the story about the nigun of Yud Beis Tammuz Nikava, which he calls, which means Ein Eid Milvadeh. McCall was dancing in Kastrama and making kulas. So, but that's when he sang it by Yud Beis Tammuz, before Yud Beis Tammuz, Gimel Tammuz, that kufa. But then he goes on to tell the story that how the Rebbe Rashab heard it as well, not then obviously, earlier, B'chayov. So he said, this nigun is a nigun from Wald, like a nigun from the forest, a wild song, a Wald nigun. And then he explained to me about Ichas Eres de Teyu and Kelim de Tikkun. So we have that expression. I was looking, is there anywhere where we have this biur, kameshos, of Eres de Teyu and Kelim de Tikkun? I have not found it. If anybody has a place, please mention it. What does it mean practically? Generally speaking, to use simple English, Teyu is radical energy. It's extreme energy. It's undisciplined energy. But it's very kedusha. It's a lot of power. That's why it needs to be diminished. It needs to be disciplined. The Kelim and Teyu are very negligible, very small, very weak. When you say Eres de Teyu and Kelim de Tikkun, you're saying not just balanced status, but literally intense, radical forces, but in a way that people can relate to it. So it's really about packaging revolution in ways that people can relate to it and don't feel overwhelmed and won't be terrified. But it's revolution. Because Eres de Teyu is not revolution. Eres de Teyu is Tikkun Staka, balanced, Seder Mesudar. Eres de Teyu and Kelim de Tikkun is radical, but in levushim and kelim and garments that we can relate to. So that's what the Rebbe was saying. He wants us to help do everything possible to bring on the revolution of the Geula, but make sure it's done in Kelim de Tikkun. And we've spoken past times, different answers that Rebbe gave. Kelim de Tikkun means not just Kelim de Tikkun, but by a person who knows, comes from the world of Tikkun, and a person who makes a plan based on the world of Tikkun. So that's briefly the explanation. Let's go now to the essays. The essays are 3 essays as always. Essay number 1 is The Answer by Russell Malinas, age 63, Sterling Heights, Michigan. Short essay, and actually uses my book as a basis for it, so Torah Meaning for Life. In this essay, I hope to answer the age-old question, what is the purpose of life, and how do I know I am on track to fulfill this purpose? And goes on to describe her life. I'm currently 63 years old, and for many years I've been searching for happiness in this material world. And describes the different ways she's gone through this, and then finally found it through Torah Meaning for Life, and that led her to Chassidus, and how to bring it into her personal life. I'll let the essay speak for itself. It's a very short essay. This essay can be seen as the other new essays we post at meaningfullife.com/mylife, as well as if you subscribe to our newsletter, we send out links to the new essays as they are posted. Essay number 2 is Passing on the Baton by Esther Kosofsky, age 56, Longmeadow, Massachusetts. Every Jewish person is given a divine soul, and this soul is charged with a life mission at birth to follow the Torah and live a godly existence. Goes on to explain this journey and the mission of a person in this world with a very interesting life story about an Olympic athlete, about passing on the baton, and I'm not going to spoil it for you, but how it did not work out, but nevertheless becomes a lesson to us in how our own journey, in our marathon of life, and how Chassidus helps us do our marathon and deal with also the setbacks that we go through. So that's the second essay. And finally, essay number 3 is Bitul and the World to Come by Pamela McCall, age 66, Centerville, Ohio. More than a decade ago, I began to study Chassidic Judaism from a rabbi here in Dayton, Ohio. I'd given up on finding a church, as I was a believer in actually the person that they honor tonight, but struggled with Christian doctrines as explained by the church, like the Trinity, the divinity of, or the payment of sins on the cross as a way of reconciling man with God. I had written an essay on biblical animal sacrifice and began looking for someone to read it. To me, it was obvious. Biblical sacrifice was a matter of laying hands on an animal and sacrificing as though one were giving one's own life back to God. I could not find a Christian or of any sort to read or to agree with me on this subject, so I began looking for a Jew, thinking surely there would be Jews who had written about this or someone I could talk to. This turned out to be a more difficult quest than I had imagined. However, after months of failure, someone told me that there were emissaries of a Chassidic leader named Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson right in this town, and that one of them was the sort of guy who might be willing to read what I had written. His name was Rabbi Shmuel Klatskin. So I sent this man my essays, and he contacted me. He told me I knew little to nothing, and I know that I knew little to nothing, and now I know that he was and why he was right. Continues on about the journey that she took, a Christian woman learning Chassidus. This person submitted an essay. I find it quite fascinating that the essay contest reached Pamela, and I thank you so much for this essay. I'm not going to, again, I would like people to read it on their own, but I'll just read a few other key lines. For me, the problem with the whole world is the relentless rule of the human ego, in the sense of the false self. And Chassidus taught me what Bitul was. From what I've learned about the several levels of a human being from Chassidus, I've distilled them down to two for the purpose of distinguishing us from animals. The nefesh, and talks about the nefesh and the divine. Yeah. From this I learned that God has made us unique as human beings, beginning with Adam, who received the breath of life, which I now understand is to be the Spirit of God. Very good essay, thank you, as the other essays are. Again, this is all posted, and I definitely recommend this read because it's unique. You don't get such essays every day. And I found it interesting that reading it today. Well, my friends, we come to the conclusion of this special early edition of MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 194, on Nittel night. We are doing this now, this early afternoon. Everyone should use Nittel as the Rebbe directs in Vayechi Tov. Check it out. And in general, this should be a very simchadik week, a week where we transform even things that may appear negative into positive. We just had a great living example of that, and maybe we have many more such examples. And finally, the real bitachon of it all is that the Geula Amitis Vashlema, where there'll be the real simcha and agdus of alle Eden, alle kreisen, not just the Charedim and the Fruma, but the whole world and the entire world completely, all refined, all ready to be refined in the Geula Amitis Vashlema. And it should happen before even the Yehav Chayam Meil L'Sasn L'Simcha V'Asara B'Teves. We're here every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m., except, of course, today. And this is all archived, and everyone should have a very blessed week. It's always an honor. This has been Simon Jacobson, MyLife Chassidus Applied. Thank you very much.